Hello and welcome to this video. In this tutorial, we are going to learn about variables in Java. So go ahead and open your Android Studio and then start a new Android Studio project. Click on Empty Activity. So here, again, because I am using the Android Studio 3.3 Canary version, first it is going to ask me to specify the template, the activity, and then I am supposed to enter the name of the application and the minimum API level. So the name of the app here for me is going to be variables in Java. You can name it whatever you want, but make sure to name it something that is meaningful to you, because this project is dedicated to learning about variables specifically. Then we have the package name, and then we have the save location path. The language is Java, and the API level, the minimum API level, is going to be API 16. So here we have, if you are using the Android Studio 3.3, you may have this option, include navigation controller. So I'm gonna uncheck this option and I'm gonna click on finish. So okay, here you can see again we have this experimental Gradle async feature. So maybe it is because I am using this Canary version that it is showing me this dialog every time that I run a project. So I'm gonna click on yes. Next, so let's go inside this app folder. Go ahead and open the Java folder, the first package, and then open the main activity.java file. So let's go inside this onCreate method, which is somehow the starting point of the application. So when the application loads on the device, this onCreate method is going to be called. Let's create a variable. First, let's see what is a variable. A variable is just a container for a value. But in Java, because it is a strong typed language, first we must specify the data type of our variable. So for example, I want to have a container that can hold a value of type integer. So in that case, I need to type in here int. This is the data type of the integer. So first, let me tell you that int is a primitive data type. It is not an object. So you will learn more about objects, classes later. But in this video, I'm gonna focus on primitive data types. So a primitive data type is somehow light and it does not occupy a lot of memory. So for example, I want to create a variable of type int, and then we need to specify the name of the variable. So the name of my variable is age. And then I put an assignment operator here. So here, for example, I put a value for the age, 20. And then at the end of our statement, we must put a semicolon. So here, this is a variable in Java. This is the syntax. First the data type, then the name, and then we have the assignment operator. So this is very important. It is not an equal operator. Okay, it is an assignment operator. And this means that whatever we have at the right hand side of this operator, so we have number 20, okay? Whatever we have at the right hand side of this operator is going to be assigned to the left hand side of this operator. So we are assigning number 20 to this age variable. And maybe we want to create a decimal number variable. So here, because this variable is of type integer, we cannot use a decimal value. For example, I cannot put .5 here because now it is a decimal number, and this variable, which is of type integer, cannot hold a decimal value. And if you hover over this error area, it says incompatible types required int, but found double. So double is going to be the data type of the decimal value. So let me change this number to an integer number. So in order to create a decimal value, we are going to type in here float, and then I can say, for example, price, and then put an assignment operator, and I put 1.5 semicolon. So here we have a decimal number, and we are assigning it to this variable, which is of type float. So float is used to create decimal numbers, but it is somehow something that could be considered as double. So there are two data types in Android or in Java that is responsible for holding decimal numbers. So I'm going to create a number, the comment here. The first one is the float, and the second one is the double data type. So what's the difference between float and double? So the float data type, the float variable, can hold less precise decimal numbers, but the double data type can hold more precise decimal values. So for example, we have a variable of type float, and we have this value which is a decimal value, but it is showing us an error because the compiler thinks that we want to assign a double value to this variable. So I need to put an F here in order to specify that my value, this decimal number, is actually float. I am explicitly specifying the float value here. So now the error is gone. Now, if I want to, I can put the double data type, and then the name is going to be user score, and I put an assignment operator. So because this double data type, this variable, can hold more precise decimal numbers, I can put, for example, 4.5789321. So it does not mean that this float variable cannot hold this decimal number that I specified for this user score, which is of type double. This means that the double data type occupies more space in memory, but the float data type occupies less. So for example, for the integer data type, we have another data type called byte, and this byte data type can hold integer values, but it is going to be a limited amount. So let's name our variable computer RAM, and then I'm gonna assign a large value to this variable, and let's see what happens. Let's assign a large integer value to this variable. You can see that if I put a semicolon at the end of my statement, now it is showing me an error. If I hover over this error area, it says integer number too large for this byte variable. So the amount of integer values that you can assign to your byte variable is limited. You cannot assign a very large number to a variable of type byte. But if I change this byte to int, let's see what happens. Again, it's showing us an error. This means that this number, this value, again, is too large for this integer data type. So now you may ask that, do we have another data type that can hold more larger integer values? Yes, we do have, and that is long. So let's delete this int and change it to long. Now you can see that the error should be gone, but we still have error, and it says that integer number too large. So I'm going to put an L here at the end of my value. So now the error is gone. This means that this value that we specified here is called a long literal. So literal here means the actual value that we assign to a variable. So when I delete this L here at the end of my value, it is showing us an error because the compiler thinks that we are assigning an integer value to a long variable. So because the compiler thinks that it is an integer literal or value, then it's showing us an error. So we need to put an L here. Now we can see that the error is gone, and this means that we are assigning a long number to a long variable. But if I, for example, change this long to int now, because this value is a long value, it is showing us an error. So let's change it to long. Now the error is gone. So we have byte, int, and long for integer values. We have float and double for decimal numbers. We have another data type that is going to be true or false, and that is called Boolean. So we need to put here Boolean, and the name is going to be, for example, we are playing a game and we want to know whether the character is dead or alive. So I'm going to type in here is dead. So the Boolean variables, most of the times their names start with is because it can only hold a value true or false. So I personally prefer to start my Boolean variables with is. So for example, here it is dead. So here I can either assign the value true to this variable, or I can put the value false. So these are the primitive data types. We have another data type called string. But string is not a primitive data type. It is object. And an object occupies some space in memory. So here, in order to create a string variable, we need to put the keyword with capital S. So I'm going to type in here string. So you can see that string comes from the java.lang package. And the name of the string data type starts with a capital S because string is a class in the java.lang package. I will talk about classes and objects later, but for now, that whenever you create a class in Java, your class name should start with a capital letter. This is a convention in Java. So take a look at this class main activity. It starts with a capital letter M. So, or for example, this app compat activity, it starts with a capital letter A. But you can see that our variable names starts with a lowercase letter. So for example, we have age, price, user, score. So this is called camel casing. And here I'm going to create a variable of type string. So first, let me tell you that a string is just a combination of characters. So we have a collection of characters in one place that is called string. So for example, I want to put name here. This is the name of my variable of type string, and I put an assignment operator. In order to create a value of type string, we need to put two quotes so that the compiler knows that we are actually going to create a value of type string. So I'm going to type in here my name and then a semicolon at the end of our statement. So here you can see that this string value is just a collection of characters. We have M, O, R, T, E, Z, A. But now that they are combined with each other, it is called string. So now you may ask that do we have a data type that can hold only one character? Yes, we do, and that is called char. So char is not a class, it is a primitive data type, unlike string. So now, for example, I want to put the letter A. This is the name of my variable, and I put an assignment operator. So in order to create a character literal, instead of double quotes, we put single quotes. Inside the single quotes, we are allowed to put only one character. So I'm going to put A and a semicolon at the end of my statement. So now we have a variable and its data type is char. The name is letter A, and we have this character literal that is going to be the letter A inside the single quotes. If you put double quotes, the compiler thinks that you want to create a string literal, and it's gonna complain and it won't allow you to run your application because you are winded up with a compile error. So if I, for example, delete this value and put two quotes and put A here, now it's showing me an error and it says incompatible types required char found java.lang.string. So I need to put single quotes A. So there are two types of variables. We've got primitive data types and we have got reference types. So there are two kinds of memories. We have got stack memory and we have heap memory. So for example, primitive variables are stored in stack. So inside the stack memory, we create a variable and we name it age, and the value is assigned to that variable. So it is directly put in the stack memory and we have the value there also. So whenever you create a variable of type primitive data type, such as int or float, it is going to be stored in the stack memory with its value. So now, let me tell you that objects are stored in the heap memory. So for example, we have the stack memory, okay? And here we know that when we create a primitive data type variable, such as this one, computer RAM, we know that this variable is stored in the stack memory with its value. But what happens when we want to create a variable of type string, which is not a primitive data type, but it's an object, a reference type? So in that case, the stack memory is going to hold only the address of this object, of this string literal. So where does this string object is actually stored? It is stored in the heap memory. So here you should know that when we create a variable of type string, which is going to be a class, so in that case, the stack memory is going to hold a reference, only the address of this object that is actually stored in the heap memory. So in the heap memory, we have the actual object. So here I just put the address in order to show you that the address that we have inside the stack memory is going to be the address of this object inside the heap memory so that we can find this object. So now you should know that stack memory is more faster than the heap memory because we can access it more faster. But it's not that noticeable. I just wanted to let you know the difference between stack memory and heap memory. So finally, I wanted to show you this primitive data types chart. So here you can see that we have the integer primitive data type. So these are the different variations of this data type. First, we have the byte, and the size of the byte variable is 8 bits. The minimum value that a byte variable can hold is -128, and the maximum value that a byte variable can hold is 127. We've got also a char data type. It is also considered as int. So the size is 16 and the minimum and the maximum. So because we can only assign single letters to the char data type, you should know that a char variable can hold all the Unicode characters. So if you have a char variable, you can search online for the Unicode characters, and then you can assign your specific Unicode character to a char variable. Next, we have the short that I haven't shown you yet. So the short data type, it is again of type integer. So the size of a short data type is 16 bits, and the minimum value that it can hold is -2 to the power of 15, and the maximum value that it can hold is 2 to the power of 15 minus 1. So here, let me tell you that we've got also an unsigned integer. So an unsigned integer means that there is no sign before the number. So here you can see that we have this minus here. So when you create an unsigned integer, this minus here, there is no minus anymore, and your minimum value starts at 0. Okay, there is no negative value, and then the maximum value that your integer variable can hold is going to be twice the number of the maximum value of a regular integer value. Okay, so that's something that I wanted to let you know about. But you don't have to worry about this minimum and maximum values, because as long as you know that, for example, a short variable can hold larger values than the byte variable, that's enough. Or for example, as long as you know that the int data type can hold larger values than the short data type, that's enough. So here you can see that the int data type is 32 bits, the minimum value and the maximum value. We've got the long data type, it is 64 bits, minimum, maximum, float, double, and the boolean. So now let's go back to Android Studio. So here it is, our variables in Java project. So here you can see all of these variables that we have created. And now if I want to, I can go ahead and output these values to the console. So I'm going to type in here log.i. So I'm going to type in here my tag as the first argument, comma, and then, for example, I can output the value of the computer RAM. So because it is of type integer or long, we need to convert it to a string value by putting a plus operator and 2 quotes. And then we need to put a semicolon at the end of our statement. Let's go ahead and run our project and see what happens. Next, let's go to the logcat, and inside this search area, make sure that the filter is at least info or verbose, that's okay. Inside the search area, just enter the tag value that you specified for the log. So mine is my tag, and then we should see the value that we put as the value of the computer RAM variable. So here, let me tell you that whenever you refer to your variable name, this means that we want to access the value of our variable. So here you can see that in line number 19, we created this variable of type long and its name is computer RAM. Now in line number 27, we referred to this name computer RAM in order to access the value that we assigned to this variable. So when I said computer RAM, I meant the value that is inside of this variable. So hopefully that makes sense. So now it's challenge time. Go ahead and create a variable that can hold the sum of 2 integer numbers and then output the result to the screen. So if you need to search online for this specific challenge, go ahead and do it and then solve it. And then continue watching this tutorial and see me to solve this challenge. So now let's go ahead inside this main activity class. Then let me comment out these variables. We don't need them anymore. I'm gonna create a variable here. So here I'm gonna type in int, and the name of my variable is going to be sum 2 integer numbers. Sum 2 integer numbers. I put an assignment operator, and then I just need to put an integer number, for example number 10 plus number 5, semicolon. And then I just need to refer to a text view inside our activity underline main.xml. So here it is, my hello world. I just need to select it, and here I just need to specify an ID for this text view. So I'm gonna type in here text as the ID, and then I'm gonna go to the main activity. So we need to create a reference to our text view. So inside this onCreate method, I'm gonna type in here text view. So you can see that as I'm typing here text view, this text view is a class because it starts with a capital T. So this means that we are going to create an object out of this class. And you know that objects are stored in the heap memory. And inside the stack memory, we only have an address or a reference to the heap memory, the address of the object that is created. So we are going to create, so let's name it as text assignment operator. So in this specific case, we want to reference to the text view object that we put on this activity underline main.xml. So I'm gonna type in here find. So we are going to use this method, find view. So remember, all of the UI components in Android are views. Okay, so find view by ID r dot ID dot, and then I just need to refer to the ID that I specified for our text view. So as I'm typing here text, I'm gonna put a semicolon at the end of my statement. So sometimes your Java file may not recognize the ID that you specified for your specific UI component inside the XML file. In that case, you just need to go and click on build at the type and then click on rebuild project. And if the problem didn't solve, you need to go to the file and then click on invalid caches or restart. So now that we have a reference to this text view, I'm gonna say that text dot set text. So I'm calling a method on this text here. I will talk about methods later in this section. So set text, and then I just need to refer to the sum to integer numbers variable. So because the set text method needs a string value and our variable is of type integer, I need to convert this value to a string value so that our application wouldn't crash. Let's go ahead and run our app and see what happens. So here it is, our application, and here it is the number at the center, number 15. So let me go ahead and increase the font size. So select this text view inside this attribute section, click on search icon and search for text size, and then let's change it to 30 SP. Okay, I need to put it again. Sometimes your changes may not affect the attributes of your UI component, and it might ask you to enter your value again. So here it is, our text. Now let's go back to main activity. So hopefully you have successfully solved this challenge, and now we have another challenge. But first, let me tell you that we've got operator precedence in Java. So this means, let me create a new line and then I'm going to create a comment. This means that, for example, if you have an operation inside the parentheses, the operation that is inside the parentheses has higher precedence than any other operations. So for example, if I have inside the parentheses number 3 multiplied by 5, okay, then if I put, for example, plus 5 multiplied by 7, then in this operation, first you can see that the operation inside the parentheses is going to be executed first. So first it's going to execute the 3 multiplied by 5, and then the result here will be added to the result of this operation, number 5 multiplied by 7, because the multiplication operator, the division operator, and the percent operator has higher precedence than the plus and the minus operator. So here I'm gonna type in here first parentheses, and then we have the multiplication, division, and the percent operator that is going to give you the remaining of a division operator. So for example, if you divide number 10 by 5, so if you use the percent operator, in that case it is going to give you the remaining of that operation. So number 10 divided by 5, the result is 0, but what is going to be the remaining of that? The remaining or the remnant value is going to be 0. So we'll learn about these operators later. For now, I just want to let you know about the precedence of these operators. So after the multiplication, division, and the percent operator, we have the plus minus operator. So hopefully that makes sense. So we have another challenge. So write an Android app that takes 2 numbers as input from the user and output the multiplication and division result of these 2 numbers to the screen. So good luck. So now let's go ahead and solve this challenge. Go ahead and open the activity underline.xml file, and then we need to put 2 edit texts into our layout. So inside this palette section, search for edit text, and then here we have the plain text. I'm gonna put it here. So if you don't want to see this blueprint area, because we don't need it here, so here you can see that we have an icon that it says select design. So here we have design plus blueprint. Instead, choose design, and then we only have the design. So now that we have this edit text, I'm going to add the constraints to the left, right, and to the top. Next, we have another edit text. So I'm going to select this edit text and then Control C in order to copy it, and then Control V in order to paste it. So here I'm gonna, so we have this one, I'm gonna select this one, the below one. Okay, so you can see that the constraints are added for us automatically because we copied this edit text and pasted here. So the constraints that we created for this edit text have also been copied. So that's why you can see that both of these edit texts now have constraints. So if you want to delete a specific constraint, so for example, I don't need this constraint of this second edit text. You can see this constraint at the top edge of this edit text to the top edge of the layout. So in order to delete this constraint, I just need to double click on this little circle that is pulsating in red color. I'm going to double click on it. So now you can see that the constraint is gone. So now I'm going to create a constraint from the top edge of this edit text to the bottom edge of this first edit text that we have at the top. Okay, so now it works fine. Now let's select the first edit text, and then let's go ahead and click on View All Attributes. And then for the text, let's delete this value, and let's find the hint attribute. So for the hint, just type in here, enter the first number, ... And then for this second edit text, again, delete this name value. And then for the hint attribute, type in here, enter the second number. Okay, now that we have these two edit texts, we need to specify an ID for each of these edit texts. Select the first edit text, and for the ID, just type in here, EDT number 1. So here it is showing me this message that says update usages. So this will update all XML references and Java R field references. So you should always click on yes, because when you specify an ID or when you change an ID of your UI component, all of the XML references should be updated as well. But sometimes it might not work, or for example, inside one of your Java files, you might have a reference to your ID, the old ID actually, and now that you are updating the ID, it might not get updated. But here I'm gonna just click on this checkbox that says don't ask again during this session, and I'm gonna click on yes. So here for this ID, let's change the ID to EDT first number. It's much more meaningful. And select. Okay, now you can see that the constraints are a little bit disorganized, so I don't know why. It might be one of the bugs of the constraint layout. So in order to solve the problem, no problem, I'm gonna click on this icon that says delete or clear all constraints. Okay, so now it works fine. I'm gonna put this edit text here, and I'm gonna add the constraints again. So to the right, to the left. So you can see that the ID is EDT first number. So now I'm gonna put the second edit text, a constraint to the bottom edge of this top edit text, to the right and to the left. Okay, now let's select the second edit text, and for the ID, just type in here EDT second number. So now let's also specify an ID for this hello world text view. So I'm going to create a constraint to the right, to the left. Let's create a constraint to the bottom edge of this edit text. We can also create a constraint to the top edge of the layout, but I think this bottom edge of this edit text is fine. And then that's fine. Okay, let's go to our main activity.java file. First, we need to have a reference to our edit text. So edit text, EDT first, or let's just put the letter F and then n as the first number. So next I need to type in find view by id r.id dot edt first number. Now we need to have a reference to the second edit text, edtsn as edt second number, r.id dot edt second number. Make sure that you are referring to the correct ID, because if you, for example, refer to a wrong ID, you might not get the result that you are after to, and your application may get buggy. So next, we want to have the multiplication of the first number and the second number. So I'm gonna create a variable here, int. I'm gonna type in here multiplication result. So I'm gonna type in here m result. And first we need to get the value of the first edit text. So edt fn dot get text dot toString. So here we have a string value, so we need to convert it to an integer value, because the user is supposed to enter an integer value. So integer dot parse int, and then let's put this value inside the parentheses of this parse int method. So I'm gonna type in here multiplied by, now we need to get the value of the second edit text, the edtsn. So I'm gonna type in here integer, because it is also need to be converted to an integer value. So integer parse int, so edtsn dot get text dot toString. So let me put a semicolon here. So now let me create a new line so that you can see on the screen what's going on here. And then we need to also have the result of the division. But first, let's test this feature. In programming, you should always break the problems into smaller problems and then solve them one by one. So first, let's solve the multiplication problem. Let's see that whether we can multiply the value of the first edit text by the value of the second edit text. But let's go ahead and open the activity underline main.xml. And these edit texts expect numbers from the user. So if the user, for example, enters a string value or the letter A or whatever value that is not a numeric value, the application may crash. So I will talk more about exception handling in Java later, but for now, we don't want the application to crash. So in that case, we just want to show a keyboard to the user that only contains numbers. So in order to do that, I'm gonna select both of these edit texts. So inside this componentry section, hold down the shift key and select both of these edit texts. And then go ahead and open this attribute section. Make sure that you can see all of the attributes, and then search for the input type. Next, the input type, make sure to uncheck this text person name, and then check the number. So I'm gonna choose a keyboard that only shows a number to the user. So let's choose, for example, number here, only the number. Now let's go ahead and run the app and see what's going to happen. So here you can see that our application crashed. So let's go ahead and see what is wrong with our project. We need to go and open the logcat. So here, where you should find the error. So I'm gonna delete this tag and I'm gonna click on error so that I can see the error codes. And here it says that we have the number format exception. So there is something wrong with the number for input string 2 quotes. And it says, you can see this blue line, it says main activity.java number 42. So it says that the number 42 inside the main activity class is responsible for the error. Let's click on it and let's see what's going on here. So here we can see that it has, for example, a problem with this line of code. So what is the problem? First, we are getting the edit text. So these two lines of code are okay. But here we have an integer variable. So it is going to get the value of the integer that parse int. So here you can see that we are inside the onCreate method. First, let me tell you that we are inside the onCreate method. And as soon as the application loads, the onCreate method runs. And another important point that I want to let you know about is that the flow of the program is from top to bottom. So whatever you write here inside the onCreate method is going to be executed from top to bottom. So for example, first it is going to execute this super.onCreate, and then it is going to execute the set content view, and then it's going to go ahead and execute line by line until it reaches to the ending curly brace of the method. But here we have something that caused the app to crash. So what is the error? So it's your challenge. Go ahead and look at the codes and try to find the error. And always remember that 95% of programming is all about debugging. So give it a go, and then when you're done, watch this tutorial, continue watching this tutorial and see how I am going to find the bug. So we know that this operation is going to be executed inside the onCreate method, and the onCreate method is going to be the starting point of our application. This means that when the user runs the app, as soon as the app runs, this onCreate method is going to be executed. So that's why you can see that when I run the app keeps crashing. So you can see that here we are creating a variable of type integer, and the name is mResult or multiplication result. And then we are converting a string value to an integer value. So here, let's go to this activity underline main.xml. So as soon as the app runs, there is no value inside our edit texts. So when the app runs on the user's device, the user has not entered a value into this edit text yet. So in that case, it is trying to convert an empty string value to an integer value. So that's why you can see that inside the logs, it says that we have a number format exception. And it says for input string 2 quotes, an empty string value. So it is trying to convert an empty string value to an integer value. So that's why the app keeps crashing. And here we should not put this code inside the onCreate method. We should put a button inside the activity underline main.xml. So let's go ahead, and here we can see that we have this hello world text view. So we can do something so that when the user clicks on this hello world text view, then it is going to listen to the click of the user. So we have an onClick listener for this text view too. So select this text view and then search for onClick. So remember that all the views in Android have this onClick attribute. So I can just type in here hello world clicked, and then select this value and copy this value. Go ahead inside the main activity.java file after the ending curly brace of this onCreate method, and make sure that you are inside the curly braces of the class main activity. I'm going to type in here public void, and the name is going to be, so I'm going to paste the name here because it must be the exact value that I specified for the onClick attribute, and it needs a parameter of type view. So I'm going to type in here text view as the name. So here you can see that it is showing us that the view class is in red. So this means that the view class is not imported to the file yet. So I'm going to click on it and then hold down the Alt, enter, and I'm going to import the class to my file. So if I scroll to the top, you can see that the Android.view.view is imported. So here I'm gonna open and close this method by using these curly braces. Inside the method, I am going to first copy these codes, or we need to cut these codes here because we do not want them to be here. And let's go and put it inside the hello world clicked method. First, we are getting the EDT first number and the EDT second number. And then we have this variable that gets the result of multiplication of the first number and the second number. And then we can output the result to our text view. So we can say that, so first let's go ahead and see that we can see that we have this text view declared inside the onCreate method. So now I am going to talk about the concept of block in Android. So an opening curly brace followed by a closing curly brace is considered as a block. So we have a method, a class. So later you are going to learn about interfaces. But here, I just want you to know that a block is just an opening curly brace followed by a closing curly brace. So what does this mean? This means that, for example, inside this hello world clicked function or method, we have these two edit texts. But can we access these edit texts outside of the scope or block of this method? So after the ending curly brace of this hello world clicked method, I cannot type in here, for example, edtn, because now it is not recognizable. Now we cannot refer to a variable that is created inside the hello world clicked function because I cannot access the scope of this method. So that's why it is very important that you always consider the scope or the block of your code. So here we want to access the value of this text view. We want to get a reference to our text view that we have inside this activity_main.xml file. But this text view is created inside the onCreate method. And this hello world clicked function cannot access the scope of the onCreate method. And as a result, we cannot access the text variable. So how do we solve this problem? So it is another challenge for you. Go ahead and search online and see what you can find and solve this challenge on your own. And then you can continue watching this tutorial in order to see how I am going to solve this problem. So in order to solve this problem, we need to declare our text view inside a class instead of the onCreate method. So here we have this text view that is referring to our text in the activity_main.xml. So I'm going to go ahead and go inside the curly braces of this main activity class. And I'm going to type in here private. So we are going to create an instance variable. I will talk about instances and instance variables later. But for now, just know that the variables that we create inside the classes is called instance variables. So here we want to create a variable inside our main activity class. So it is going to be an instance variable. And you should always declare your instance variables private. So here we have the private keyword, and then we should specify the data type, which is going to be text view. And the name of our variable could be text. Now that we have declared this text view, so notice that we are not initializing our variable here, we are just declaring it. In order to initialize it, we need to go inside the onCreate method so that when the application loads, our text is going to be initialized. So here, let me tell you that when you don't initialize your variable that is declared, if you run your project and if your app tries to access the value of a text or text view that is not initialized, then in that case, your application is going to crash. So for example, if I go ahead and comment out this text view here that we have here, so here you can see that I have declared our variable, this text, and I haven't initialized it so that in order to have a reference to our text view inside the activity underline main.xml. So now that it is not initialized, you can see that in line number 38 inside the onCreate method, we are referring to this text variable in order to output this value of this sum two integer numbers variable. So let's go ahead and see what happens. Let me run the app, choose a device, and then click on OK. So now my application crashed. So it keeps crashing. If I run it again, you can see that it says variables in Java keeps stopping. So in order to see what is happening here, we need to go to the logcat at the bottom. So here we can find the error. So make sure that the filter is error so that we can see only the error lines here. And it says that we have a null pointer exception. So this means that the app is trying to have a reference to an object inside the memory. So usually it is the heap memory. So when it is going to refer to an object inside the heap memory, there must be an object inside the memory. If there is no object, we are going to wind up with this error, null pointer exception. And let's see what is the description. It says attempt to invoke virtual method void .android.widget.textView.setText, the setText method, java.lang.char sequence. So here it says on a null object reference. So it says that we are trying to call the setText method of the text view. So let me show you the code here. We are trying to call the setText method on this text object that is actually null because we haven't initialized it. So we are calling this method on a null object. So here you can see it says on a null object reference. So when it tries to call a method on a null object or invalid object, then our application keeps crashing. So null means nothing or an invalid value. So in Java, this is very important. We should be very careful about our variables and how they are initialized. If we try to access a variable that is not initialized yet, then it's gonna wind up with a runtime exception and our application is going to crash. So make sure that when you declare a variable, you actually initialize it. So inside the onCreate method, now I'm gonna go ahead and type in here text. So here you can see that inside the onCreate method, I can now refer to this text variable that I created, I declared inside the class. So the scope of this method here can access the higher scope. The higher scope is the main activity class. So the onCreate method is inside the main activity class, and whatever we put inside the main activity class can be accessed by the methods that we create inside the main activity class. So this onCreate method is created inside the main activity class. So this method can access all the variables that we create inside the main activity class. So I'm going to say text assignment operator find view by ID r.id dot, and then I just need to refer to this ID text. That's it, semicolon. Now that we initialized our text variable, we can go ahead and call a method on it. But let's go ahead and comment out these two lines of code because we don't want to see the result of this operation on the screen. Now we are working on this hello world clicked button and we want to see the result of this operation. We want to get the inputs from the user and do a multiplication operation here. So now here you should know that when the user clicks on the text view and a keyboard pops up on the screen, the user is supposed to enter a value. But if the user doesn't enter a value and click on the text view, then it will also cause the application to crash. So in that case, we need to do some exception handling that I will talk about later. So now that we have this operation here, we have the multiplication result, right? But we are not doing anything with this variable, and if I hover over this variable, it says variable mResult is never used. So we should do something with this variable. Now that we can access this text variable that we declared inside our class and initialized inside the onCreate method, I'm going to go ahead and say dot set text, and inside the parentheses I'm going to just put the mResult. Because it is an integer value, we need to convert it to a string value by just putting a plus and 2 quotes. Let's go ahead and run this app. So now let's enter the first number. So I want to put number 5, enter the second number, number 8, and then let's click on this hello world text view. So now we can see the result, number 40. So let's change, for example, the second number and change it to number 3. Click on this text view again. Now the result is changed to number 15. So it's challenge time again. So it is going to be the final challenge of this tutorial. So go ahead and write an Android app that takes 2 numbers as input from the user and outputs the remainder of the division of the entered numbers. So you should already know what operator you need to use in order to solve this challenge. And good luck. So now in order to solve this challenge, first you can see that inside this hello world clicked function, first we are getting the input from the user, the first number and the second number. Then we have this variable mResult. So we don't need this variable anymore. So I'm gonna comment out these 2 lines of code here. So next we need to create a variable. So I can declare this variable as a float variable, because the result that we are going to get maybe is a decimal value. So we want to get a remainder of the division of the 2 numbers. So it might be a decimal value. So I'm going to declare a float variable, and the name is going to be the remainder result. So I'm going to type in here R result, assignment operator. So we want to get the input from the edit text and it should be converted to a float variable. So I'm going to type in here float, the class float, dot parse float, and then I'm going to get the edt first number dot get text dot to string, and then so what is going to be the operator that we are going to use? It is going to be the percent operator in order to get the remainder of the division operation. So the percent operator and then edt second number dot get text dot to string. So here we forgot to convert this value to a float value. So float dot parse float, and then we should put this edt sn dot get text dot to string inside the parenthesis of this parse float method. So finally, we need to put a semicolon at the end of our statement, but here we have this error. So here you can see that I have an error that is common among most of the developers. I have mistakenly put some parentheses in the wrong place. So this means that you can see that first we are getting the value of the edt first number, and we are converting it to a float value. But here you can see that I mistakenly put this percent operator inside the parentheses of this parse float method of this edt first number. So this float.parseFloat method has a starting parenthesis and an ending parenthesis. So let's put the ending parenthesis here. So now we have float.parseFloat edt first number that get text the to string, and then we want to get the remainder by using this percent operator. Next we have float.parseFloat edt second number that get text the to string. So here we have an extra ending parenthesis, so I'm going to delete it. You can see that here we have a new red line below this ending parenthesis. It says something nonsense, so I'm going to delete it. Now the problem is solved. So here it is, another common error among most of the beginners. So here I just wanted to show you what's going to happen when you put parentheses in the wrong place, or maybe you forget to put an ending curly brace of a method. So for example, if you forget to put this ending curly brace of this hello world clicked function, then you are going to wind up with a compile error and you won't be able to run your project. So if I try to run my project now, it is going to show me an error here. It says compilation failed. See the compiler error as output for details. So here you can see the compiler output. It says error reach end of file while parsing. So this means that there is something wrong with our curly braces. So we should be careful about the curly braces of a class or a method. So I'm going to put the ending curly brace in order to solve this problem. Now let's go ahead and run our project. So now we forgot to output this value to the screen. So I'm going to say text.setText, and then I'm going to get the R result and convert it to a string value. So let's go ahead and run our app. Now I'm going to enter the first number. So I'm going to enter number 10, and then the second number, which is going to be number 5. So if I click on this hello world text view, now it is showing me the remainder of the division operation of these two numbers. So number 10 divided by number 5, the result is 0, but the remainder is also 0. So if I put, for example, number 10 divided by 3, we should have number 1 as the remainder. Let's click on this text view. Now you can see the number 1 as the remainder. Or if I, for example, divide number 5 divided by 2, excuse me, then we should have the remainder here, which is again number 1. Or if I put number 6, now the remainder is 0. So hopefully this makes sense and you can understand what the percent operator means. So in the next tutorial, we are going to learn about arrays in Java. So I look forward to seeing you in the next video. So if you have any questions about the topics that you've learned so far, please post a discussion in the course, and then I will do my best to answer all of your questions.